got a question. I'm asking for a friend. Is it safe to go outside on Juneteenth? Because when I try to Google this question, I don't get much help. All right, is it safe to go outside on Juneteenth in Los Angeles? And what I see are a bunch of events getting canceled for safety reasons. Like, why the heck are all these Juneteenth events getting canceled for safety reasons? That doesn't make me feel like celebrating. So festivals getting canceled, all sorts of places and events, all right, canceling their Juneteenth celebrations. All right, so how do I stay safe on Juneteenth? All right, there's nothing. All right, you put it into Google. There's nothing about how to stay safe on Juneteenth. Right, put it into YouTube. Right, safety a priority. Okay, safety a priority.
So Tony Atkins looked at how organizers plan to reduce any spread of COVID during this big celebration.
Oh, I don't care about COVID. Okay. Juneteenth festival to have a safe space for kids. Protect yourself, protect your family. Akron canceled city events this weekend due to safety concerns? What the heck?
So it was a sad and very frustrating day for many in the Akron community. Juneteenth celebrations were scheduled throughout the day, but none took place. They were all called off because last night, city officials made the last-minute decision to cancel all large public events this weekend due to safety concerns. And now, event organizers and city officials are working to see how much loss can be recovered.
This is devastating, you know. This hurts my heart. All the effort that is put into this event. This is all the children who aren't here right now.
Fayla Sutton in tears as she looks over an empty Stoner Hawkins Park, where the Akron Black Coalition's annual Juneteenth festival should have been happening today. 6 months worth of planning unfulfilled. Friday night, Mayor Shamus Malik announced the cancellation of 11 public events this weekend, sharing a letter he received from 8 Akron council members asking that the weekend's Juneteenth celebrations be canceled, with tension still high over the June 2nd mass shooting that left 1 dead and 27 others injured at a party.
When I have more than half of Akron City Council saying that these events are irresponsible, I have to weigh that too.
The mayor stressing that there was no credible threat, but he wanted to take the letter seriously. Fayla and her co-organizer Matthew Talley now expressing their frustration over the loss of an important cultural moment and the tens of thousands of dollars that their events vendors will lose.
Things like that happen. They happen everywhere. They happen often, not just in Akron, but all over the country. Nobody else cancels their community events because of poor behavior at a private house party.
Today, Akron City Council released a statement saying that they did not ask the mayor to cancel all large public events this weekend, but only Juneteenth ones, concerned over the, quote, inequity of the police staff ratio for the different events. 3 News asked the city of Akron for a response to this, and they told us that city officials, quote, worked hard this past week to ensure there was.
Okay, so why is there so much concern about safety issues on Juneteenth? Doggone it. I mean, I just put Juneteenth crime into YouTube.
Was hosting its Juneteenth celebration at Old Settlers Park, located at 1371 Harold's Parkway. At approximately 10:50 p.m.,
2 killed in a shooting during Juneteenth
broke
festival.
out between 2 groups.
Sad.
During that altercation, someone produced a gun and began to fire.
Okay, suspects at
Multiple
large.
victims were hit.
Doggone it, man. What the
All right,
heck?
welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I do want to bring you an update out of Round Rock, Texas, at a shooting that killed 2 people and injured 6 others at this park over the weekend. For more on this, let's go out to our Fox 7 team there in Texas.
What the heck, man?
For the latest
I
details.
thought this was supposed to be a celebration.
Round Rock Police Chief Alan Banks says this Juneteenth celebration was supposed to bring the community together. Now the community is mourning after the mass shooting left 2 people dead and multiple people injured. The city of Round Rock's Juneteenth celebration ended early Saturday night after an altercation broke out between two groups. During the altercation, someone pulled a gun and fired it during the concert.
It is unfortunate that we're here celebrating a wonderful event, and we have a tragedy that happens. My thoughts, my prayers go out to our victims. My condolences go out to the families of the deceased.
Round Rock Police Chief Alan Banks confirmed during Sunday morning's press conference 2 people died on scene. According to Austin Travis County EMS, 4 adults and 2 children were taken to local hospitals with potentially serious injuries.
All the victims and the deceased were not emergency personnel or first responders. They were actually folks that were there enjoying the concert.
Chief Banks says at this time, the Round Rock Police Department and the FBI are investigating this mass shooting.
You can imagine with a traumatic incident like this, people are going to have different accounts of what happened and different accounts of what that suspect might have looked like. And so this is why it's an ongoing investigation.
Right, this is not what Juneteenth is supposed to be all about. I mean, this is cray-cray. What the heck, man? This is supposed to be a celebration. This is supposed to elevate black self-esteem. Instead, you have all these safety concerns and crimes. And I mean, oh my God. What's the appropriate way for a white person to celebrate Juneteenth? Juneteenth all-white party hosted in Baltimore by the Black Boaters Association. Oh man, this sounds awesome. Whoa, cut out the music, bro. Black Boaters Association. All right, they know how to party right. Ocean's 20 looks diverse. Okay, what the heck here? All right, Juneteenth. This looks interesting. People coming over for this party. What the heck, man? This isn't supposed to be what Juneteenth is all about. What the heck? Whoa. This is not the spirit of Juneteenth. What the heck? This is not the true spirit of Juneteenth. Right, we should become aware of human trafficking. We should enjoy the day, but not too much because that would be white appropriation. Right here, the innocent victims of the Juneteenth mass shooting in Round Rock, Texas. We have to get tougher on crime and hold criminals accountable. Suspect still at large. Walking away from the Twitter thread after posting Juneteenth crime statistics. Gay pride at the San Francisco Juneteenth parade. Very few attendees to the parade. It was dead, no energy. People in the crowd were just passers-by. Right. Where's the energy at San Francisco's Gay Pride Juneteenth event? What the heck? What the heck, man? What the heck? Where's the Gay Pride? Where's the Juneteenth Pride? San Francisco really lacks diversity. Doesn't have nearly enough African Americans keeping things lively. This is no Gay Pride Juneteenth party. I mean, seriously, this is the best that San Francisco can do for Gay Pride and Juneteenth. I mean, don't these two communities have a tremendous amount in common? I mean, surely their common humanity should unite them more than divide them. But it's like the Gay Pride and the Juneteenth Biden voters, all right? They're all Biden voters. Why aren't they celebrating with much more spirit and enthusiasm? Gosh. Man. What the heck? All right, good on you, Jill Stein. Yeah, this is how I feel. Juneteenth is our country's second Independence Day, but it's really superior to July the 4th. Yeah, Black Asian solidarity. That's what we need. We need more documentaries from BIPOC creators. Police did not release a description of the suspect in the Juneteenth celebration shooting. I wonder who that could be. I wonder if there's anything that might help locate the suspect. So much crime on Juneteenth. So many safety concerns. So many events getting canceled. My God, I feel like we should be doing better as a country. Not like this, man. This is not the spirit, the true spirit. They fail to understand the real meaning of Juneteenth. Oh, this is a very pretty newsreader.
The search is still on for those involved in a shooting that left 2 people dead and possibly a dozen injured, including children. And now the FBI is involved. Round Rock police say during the Juneteenth celebration last night, 2 groups got into a fight, which led to the shooting. Austin Travis County EMS confirms they transported 6 victims, all with possibly serious injuries. And Williamson County EMS confirmed they transported another 6 victims. We're told they were all innocent bystanders. It all happened at Old Settlers Park, and that's where we find KVU's Malia Masamoto. And Malia,
I got a problem because I'm in love with the TV newsreader, but she only ever gives me bad news. Every update is gloom and doom, and I know she feels bad about it too. Too bad it's on the auto cue. Why is it got to be like that, baby? What about the bright side too? Let's come back tomorrow. Maybe your spin will change its tune. I'm in love with the TV newsreader, but I only see her when she's on the clock. Her voice is ringing in the living room, and she's there more nights than she's not, but only from the waist up. Why is it got to be like that, baby? What about the bright side too? Let's come back tomorrow. Maybe your spin will change its tune. Throw me to the sport and weather. Make me feel better before they send it back to you. More puff pieces and car chases, world and finance news. Gotta get commercial breaks in, drumming up the views. I'll be watching you. Why has it gotta be like that, baby? What about the bright side too? I'm in love with the TV newsreader, but I never know what she's gonna say. The world is such a messed up place, and it changes every single day. I hope she's gonna be okay.
Malia, you were able to speak with people who were there during this very scary situation.
Scary. My God.
Yeah, Darnisha, it's been a very
Not the true
difficult day
spirit
today. I've been
of
trying to reach out
Juneteenth.
to many witnesses who were here, and this morning I was able to speak to 2 women who were here when it happened and had to lie on the ground as soon as they heard gunshots. One of them is actually a trauma therapist and is reminding people that if they were here and witnessed what happened, it's okay to get help if they need it. Flashing lights and loud noises, but not for the reason these people wanting to celebrate Juneteenth expected.
I was kind of like in disbelief that this was actually happening.
What started off as a normal day of Juneteenth celebrations in Round Rock.
It was just a beautiful day. Like, you saw families there, you saw kids on like scooters, and you know, and it was beautiful.
Had a quick turnaround in the evening.
And all of a sudden, I just hit the ground immediately.
Gosh. Paige Overland and Letitia Agent were just feet away from the shooting that left 2 dead and multiple others injured.
In a situation, you don't think it's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
In the hours after it happened, they've been processing what they went through.
It kind of changed me wanting to go out into crowds like that.
Oh, that's the worst, guys. Like, don't give in to the TV newsreader, even if she's pretty. Don't allow it to discourage you to going to raucous Juneteenth celebrations. Like, get out there, and the most important thing you can do for Biden voters is just start touching their hair. Because when you start touching their hair, that makes them feel appreciated and loved, that you're, glad to be with them, that you're celebrating with them, but you're not appropriating their celebration. Just like get out there, get on public transport, and start touching the hair of the best of Biden voters.
Because I have grandkids, I have kids.
What the heck?
And I just want
What's this pretty young thing doing with grandkids? My God.
to be there for them.
Overland is actually a trauma therapist, but is also still feeling the effects.
It's like survivor remorse or something, where it's like I feel grateful, but then I feel so overwhelmingly sad because people didn't have to lose their lives.
This is a safe place for you to process your feelings. My God. So much hate out there, so much trauma. Surely there's something that can bring us together as Americans.
Dr. at Texas Children's Hospital knew that these procedures were wrong, and he did everything he could to expose what was happening to these kids, even coming here on The Angle. Well, last week, Dr. Ethan Haim came back again, saying that heavily armed U.S. Marshals showed up at his house at 7 a.m. to charge him with 4 felonies. But there were no details. He didn't even know exactly what he was being charged with, but we do now. Dr. Haim made his first court appearance today, pleading not guilty to obtaining individually identifiable health information under false pretenses and then wrongfully disclosing it. But here's the kicker. The indictment says he did it with the intent to cause malicious harm to physicians and patients. But malicious harm? Isn't that what's being inflicted upon these kids? Dr. Ethan Haim joins me now. Dr. Haim, you have a baby on the way, I know, and you face now up to 10 years in prison. Are you concerned that they're trying to make an example out of you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening. I mean, you know, standing in that courtroom and hearing those words, you know, facing up to 10 years in federal prison is terrifying. And you think about everything I could miss, you know, my family, the birth of my first daughter, the first few years of her life. But there's something greater to fear, and that's the fear of not doing something. Because the world we deliver our children into, you know, what kind of world is that going to be if we don't stand up? So we're going to go to federal trial. If anyone wants to help, you know, our legal fund, it's givesendgo.com/Texas_whistleblower. We need all the help we can get. We need to fight this. We need to win, because if we lose, the door closes permanently on whistleblowers in the healthcare system.
Yeah, your attorney says that you were a mandatory reporter of child abuse who reported as a whistleblower to the state of Texas what you had seen in the hospital, saying this is the government going out of its way to prosecute a whistleblower. What happens next?
Well, you know, if there's one thing I would say, it's that the charges they're alleging are as unhinged and divorced from reality as the transgender interventions they're trying to cover for. You know, they have no basis in reality. Well,
they're saying, for the viewers, hold on, Dr. Haim. For the viewers who don't know the background here, they're saying that you went into doctors' files and extracted information from those files about patients without the authorization to do so, and then use that information in an unauthorized manner. I think that's what they're alleging.
Yeah, it's they have their basic facts wrong, and it's not that, you know, the most powerful federal investigative agency on the planet is so incompetent to get these things wrong. It just vindicates what we've been saying all along, is that this is a political prosecution. But to answer your question, you know, what we do moving forward is we fight. Just like I said the first time I was on your show back in January, we have our legal team together. We have.
Okay, speaking of fighting, it looks like Israel and Hezbollah are heading for a major conflict. So what would that look like? Okay, it will make what's going on in Gaza look like a Christmas party. All right, so within the first 24 hours of a full-on war between Israel and Hezbollah, you can expect probably 20,000 plus dead Israelis and probably 20,000 plus dead people in Lebanon. You can expect almost all of the major sites of Israel to get bombed, including its nuclear facilities, right? Every part of Israel is accessible to Hezbollah's bombs, and they are precision guided, right? They can drop them where they want them, and they'll definitely overwhelm Israel's air defenses. So Tel Aviv will be flattened, Jerusalem will be flattened, Haifa will be flattened, Haifa's port will be flattened, the main airport in Tel Aviv will be flattened, right? Israeli industry that's above ground will be flattened, and South Lebanon will get flattened. Right, so Hezbollah's got about 150,000 rockets, right? They can quickly overwhelm Israel's air defense system, even if the United States and other nations come to Israel's aid, right, thousands of these missiles are still going to hit, right? So Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, a scholar and an author, he says, I've seen estimates what Hezbollah could do to us in 3 days that are just horrendous. Talking about knocking out all of Israel's essential infrastructure, right? Taking out all of Israel's oil refineries, air bases, Dimona, right? The country's nuclear research facility. So Hezbollah published drone footage of Israel's Haifa port, located just 17 miles from the Lebanese border. Right, Hezbollah has good reason to feel confident that it can pierce Israel's defenses. Right, Hezbollah is the most formidably armed non-state actor in the world. Right, they are 10 times more formidable than Hamas. So Hamas came into Israel and killed 1,200 Israelis. Right, in the first 24 hours of a full-on Hezbollah versus Israel war, you'll have 20,000 plus dead Israelis. Right, Lebanon will be just bombed into the Stone Age, right? Hezbollah operates as a state within a state in Lebanon, and so Israel will target the main parts of Lebanon. They'll go after Beirut, particularly the south of Beirut, where so much of Hezbollah is located, and Lebanon's other major cities will just get pounded. So Israel Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has warned Israel will return Lebanon to the Stone Age. So it was a full-on war. Right, Israel will be devastated. Lebanon will be devastated. Surely Iran will get into the action. Then Israel will fight back against Iran and flatten significant parts of Iran. Right, Hezbollah deeply embedded in Lebanon, but the civilians have been flowing out of South Lebanon because they understand that they are going to pay a price if they are anywhere near Hezbollah. So Israel will want to destroy all semblances of Hezbollah rule in Lebanon, right? And Lebanon is dominated by Hezbollah. So we're talking about an awful amount of damage. Right? We're talking tens of thousands of casualties, right? Because right now you've got 60,000 Israelis displaced from the north of Israel. So normally the buffer zones that Israel would deploy would be inside of Lebanon, right, inside of other countries. But now the buffer zones are inside Israel. So the top 10 miles of Israel, people have cleared out of. Much of southern Israel, people have cleared out. And major military operations in Gaza have apparently come to an end. So it's just a mopping up operation. Hamas has been destroyed as an organized military force, according to Washington Post story out of Israel. So with major military options over with, right, with regard to Hamas and Gaza, then surely you're going to see Israel turning its attention now to what's going on with
We're going to continue this conversation,
Lebanon.
Dive in a little further with our friend Benjamin Rad, a lecturer of global studies over at UCLA. Benjamin, always good to see you. Let's talk about this point that Trey had at the end of that report, saying that unless the government completely collapses, nothing's going to change until those elections are held in October. But what is that even a possibility for the government in Israel to collapse?
It is. Yeah, it is. And thank you for having me back. It is if we have a situation where the existing members in the cabinet, the part of this coalition, I should say, withdraw their support. So these far-right members, the two ministers who have cabinet positions, they lead a party or two parties that have a sizable number in the parliament. They are the ones that have allowed Netanyahu to remain in power by joining with his coalition. If they were to withdraw their support, as they have threatened to do, based on what Netanyahu's actions are in Gaza, then the government will collapse well before the 2026 October period on its own.
Are we seeing it becoming more and more likely that these other members are going to withdraw their support? I mean, is Netanyahu's popularity levels, even within his own parliament, kind of dissolving before our very eyes?
Yeah, and the problem is there isn't a consensus opposition figure that could really lead a push against Netanyahu. I mean, Gantz has his supporters, and there are others as well. But what you really need is somebody from maybe within Likud who is younger, of a different mindset than Netanyahu, who could offer an alternative that would appeal to and appease the existing Likud, the conservative voters and their bloc, but somebody other than Netanyahu. So we're not seeing that yet. Now, to your original question of is it likely that those two ministers might depart? They've been threatening to do so, and there's no indication that their threats are bluff. They very much are ideologues. They are prepared to leave the government, allow it to collapse, and remain loyal to the positions they've held.
Okay, so this is from 23 hours ago.
And we've already seen it with Benny Gantz, so clearly it's something that is possible to happen once again. Let's get back to that big news, Netanyahu announcing that he has dissolved his war cabinet, making that announcement earlier today. How is this going to affect ceasefire negotiations going forward?
Well, it's a formality. With the departure of 2 ministers, including Gantz, the cabinet is all but non-existent anyway. And so it was really just sort of a shell of an entity at this point. And as far as the ceasefire negotiations are concerned, Netanyahu has made it clear that he dictates the tone and tenor of these negotiations and the negotiation process. We know that the last overture made by the United States that got a 14-0 UN vote in its favor was essentially rebuffed by Hamas or returned by Hamas with conditions that made it unworkable. So at this point, I believe that Netanyahu's ability to engage in these negotiations, they can proceed as they have been. The United States is doing its part to present proposals, offer proposals to the international community, to the people of Gaza, to the Arab supporters in a way that would check off the boxes that both sides really want to see checked off. The question becomes, can they get Hamas's leadership in Gaza?
So what's striking when you watch news coverage and you listen to the Biden administration is that it seems like the primary concern, or very close to the primary concern, is with the fate of civilians. And that's unusual in history. All right, throughout history, it's been taken for granted that a citizen, a resident, is going to share the fate of his wider entity. But that started to change, really, in the last part of the 1990s, most significantly. And my favorite academic at the moment is Amanda Alexander, senior lecturer in law at Australian Catholic University. She wrote a terrific essay in 2015, A Short History of International Humanitarian Law. And she notes that international humanitarian law is imbued with a particular sense of its history. So in international humanitarian law and in religion, right, one of the ways that these entities like to claim the power of what they're doing is to attribute their beginning, way farther back in history. That's been a common literary technique to write a document such as the Zohar in the 13th century and then attribute it to various Talmudic sages from 1300 years ago. So it's been a traditional way of trying to attract attention and to raise the status of a document and to raise the status of your agenda and to make it more persuasive to people if you can attribute it to going further back. And so too with human rights activists and international humanitarian law activists, they like to point to this long history of codes of warfare that straddle different times and cultures and just keep moving towards the current edition of international humanitarian law. But international humanitarian law has a much shorter history than what its experts would have you believe, right? It really only came to be in the 1970s, right? Before that, there was the laws of war. But now you had this movement for human rights and then international humanitarian law. So it's not just a shift in terminology, it's a fresh approach. It's a new field of law. It's an enlarged humanitarian law, and it's got all these new humanitarian principles. And one of the key developments in international humanitarian law is in 1977, additional protocols of the Geneva Conventions. All right. But despite all the things that we hear from the experts and from human rights advocates, right, the existence and the sweep and the power of international humanitarian law remains controversial, and the principles and protocols of 1977 Geneva Conventions are still very much debated. So it's only at the very end of the 20th century that you received a large number of practitioners of international humanitarian law, right? They followed the example set by human rights organizations, which came out of the disillusionment of lefties with Marxism and other left-wing utopian schemes. So they had to find a way to enjoy the feelings of pursuing utopia, and it didn't matter whether or not what they were doing made any difference in the real world. So throughout history, it's taken for granted that rights is something that a nation state can bestow upon its citizens, but there's never been much of a notion of international human rights or any kind of rights outside of your particular nation state. And in practical meaning, there aren't rights outside of what the nation state can give you. But we got this new term, international humanitarian law, right? That was the update on the laws of war. And we got a whole new understanding of the content of this law. And one of the big changes is the principle of proportionality. And the principle of proportionality now means, according to experts in human rights and international humanitarian law, that the well-being of citizens essentially should outweigh the aims of militaries, right? So the development of international humanitarian law and human rights has arrived at a place where the dominant intelligentsia behind it, which is very much on the left, will make the case that militaries have to subordinate their purposes to protect civilians. So how on earth did this come about, right? And it came about through publishing, through agitation, through activism, through very smart people putting their mind to the work. It came about through various individuals and organizations that had an agenda and wanted to see themselves receive more prestige, more money, more income, more jobs, get on the news, publish in the New York Times, get on CNN. It was a way to advance yourself in the world by wrapping yourself in utopian aims, and it didn't really matter if what you're doing had any difference in the real world. So people within international humanitarian law and human rights law, they attribute a long history to the current understanding of international humanitarian law, and they make these florid descriptions of international humanitarian law, and they refer to accepted narratives of international humanitarian law, which essentially assume that these have gone back for many decades, even centuries, and that all the main points of international humanitarian law are agreed upon. So you've got two main stories coming from this crowd. One is the story of the steady humanization of war and law, and the second is a story of imperialism and oppression. So a major foundation for international humanitarian law is a communist, Marxist, Leninist perspective on life, where capitalists get greedy and seek to appropriate those who are vulnerable, right? People of color that become imperialists and colonizers. So the orthodox history, the pious history of international humanitarian law says, oh, laws of war have always existed to limit the destruction of war, right? From the ancients, the knights of the Middle Ages, the jurists of the early modern period, all testify to this concern. And it's not just a Western concern. You've got all these other cultures such as China, Japan, India, the Islamic world. They all have their own traditions of the rules of war. Now, despite this universal concern, the attempt to limit the damage from war has suffered various setbacks. It's only in the 19th century that we got this movement to codify the laws of war, and we now get modern international humanitarian law. And so you have various activists who push this forward. So you had one Swiss bloke, Henry Dunant, and you had a major figure in the Irish Republican Army who was pushing this forward. So the pious narrative, the orthodox narrative from the human rights crusaders and the international law crusaders, right? They like to conflate all these different approaches to the laws of war with modern international humanitarian law and say, it's all part of the same stream. Now, earlier approaches to the laws of war had almost nothing in common with modern international humanitarian law, right? Until the aftermath of World War II, it was just taken for granted that civilians will share the fate of their geographic region, their entity, their people, and their state. So sometimes you'll hear the pious say, yeah, international humanitarian law is new, but it's very rare for anyone in international humanitarian law to state exactly how new it is, when the term began, why the term began. Right? So what you get is a conflation of international humanitarian law and the laws of war. And the pious in this crusade use them interchangeably, but they mean completely different things. But those pushing this orthodox narrative of international humanitarian law and human rights, they want to obscure the differences between laws of war and international humanitarian law. They want to juxtapose this image of long traditions of humanitarian law with their own achievements of the modern age. So they want to ride this story of humanity for hundreds and thousands of years, trying to reduce the damage of war and see themselves as the fullest revelation to humanity of the humane approach to law. Just like Seventh-day Adventists, I grew up Seventh-day Adventists, they saw themselves as the fullest divine revelation to humanity, And Mormons see themselves as the fullest divine revelation to humanity. And those who believe in Judaism see Judaism as the fullest divine revelation to humanity. And Christians don't think that they're part of a new religion, right? Christianity is just the fullest divine revelation to humanity. And so too with those pushing the human rights and international humanitarian law crusade. And then another key part to this story is the history of colonization, right? A history of oppression and imperialism. And so those who push international humanitarian law and bewail the death of civilians in conflicts such as Israel versus Hamas in Gaza, they tend to draw on communist methodologies, Marxist methodologies, post-colonial and critical methodologies, which are essentially communist methodologies. So they decry history where Western needs have consistently trumped humane values and exposed civilians to the violence of war, legitimized their suffering. So you'll see in the most intense rhetoric against Israel's treatment of civilians in Gaza, it's always linked to the West. The West has colonized and settled Israel. And once again, the West is exposing civilians to the violence of war. So they try to get more prestige and power for their crusade by extending its birth into the past, right? They never get specific, however. They conceal its exact creation. They want to place it in a continuum with other codes of warfare. And by deploying and relying on these dishonest histories, lawyers and human rights activists, right, try to suggest that international humanitarian law has a long and prestigious history. And then that helps them to bolster any claim that they then want to make against the war, usually to undercut Western nations fighting back against third world terror. So those who want to advocate international humanitarian law and bring awareness to all the civilian suffering in Gaza will say, look, these laws of war are well established, right? This international humanitarian law, it goes back centuries. It's unarguable. It's just obvious. It's part of a long tradition. No decent person disagrees with us. So they claim an established history. They claim universal moral validity, transcendent moral validity. They claim authority and status for the field. Say it just can't be refuted. Now, those who want to attack or change international humanitarian law, right, they will note more specifics, right? When it developed, where it developed, how it developed, who was driving it forward. So prior to the 1960s, the term international humanitarian law was not used, all right? It was not part of the field of law. And the term just started to be used in the 1960s, but it was not about law, all right? It was a ideological and cry from the heart type of dialogue. It didn't refer to real wars. So the laws of war are a completely different type of language and legal system compared to international humanitarian law. So laws of war took it for granted that the primary concern for attacking forces would be their military objectives, not the well-being of civilians. It was taken for granted that civilians would have to suffer the fate of their nation and their state. So it was taken for granted until 1960s, 1970s that a belligerent is justified in applying any amount of force and starvation which is necessary for the realization of the purpose of the war, meaning the overpowering of the opponent, which is completely different to how Israel's war in Gaza is put out. In much of the mainstream media and among the most eloquent people talking about the war in Gaza, you'll hear that there's starvation in Gaza. Now, there's a report in the Jerusalem Post pointing out that sufficient aid has been reaching Gaza, that if people in Gaza are starving, it has nothing to do with Israel or Egypt, right? There's sufficient aid getting into Gaza, right? It would only be Hamas who is stopping people in Gaza from getting food. But a major talking point by those opposed to what Israel's doing in Gaza is that Gazans are getting starved. But throughout history, this would just be taken for granted, right? That belligerents are justified in applying any amount and any degree and any type and any kind of force to realize the purpose of their war. And the second principle of the law of war is the principle of humanity, which holds that unnecessary forms of violence, all right? Violence that is not essential for the defeat of a belligerent is not permitted. But Israel's obviously gone into Gaza to wipe out Hamas. And so traditionally, anything that Israel needed to do to reach its aim of wiping out Hamas was considered acceptable and lawful and humane. So there were tepid, weak humanitarian laws protecting civilians and civilization, but only to the degree they did not interfere with military imperatives. Right? Throughout history, it's been taken for granted that military imperatives was going to rule all considerations in the operation of war. And so the laws of war would just try to make things a little easier for people after accepting that militaries will put their own agenda, right, their own purpose in launching war, that has to come first. Right, so prior to the 1960s and 70s, laws of war would adapt themselves to the reality of war, and they would leave free military necessity, right? And so the laws of war would only provide the most paltry humanitarian protection for non-combatants. So the suffering of civilians in Gaza would not have attracted much attention prior to World War II. There was just no legal, intellectual, activist framework for being obsessed with the civilian sufferers of a war, right? It was just taken for granted that they would remain exposed to bombardment, starvation, and reprisals, particularly if they took arms up against the enemy. And such restrictions as there were in the laws of war, they only applied when all parties to a conflict were bound. And Israel and Hamas, right, are not bound to anything. Israel and Hamas have not signed off on any Geneva Conventions or humanitarian laws. So much of the criticism of Israel on the matter of human rights, even before its invasion of Gaza, was that it didn't accord the same rights to non-citizens as it accorded to citizens. Right? The criticism is that Israel does not extend the same rights to people in Gaza, people in the West Bank who are not citizens of Israel, that they extend to their own citizens. But no country extends the same rights to non-citizens as they do to their own people. So one of the big blokes in the development of international humanitarian law was a terrorist, all right? Sean McBride, right? He became Secretary General of the International Commission of Jurists. And he was the Chief of Staff of the Irish Republican Army. And he was a co-founder of Amnesty International. Right, so he's a chief of staff for a terror group, and then he becomes a co-founder of Amnesty International and the leader of the International Commission of Jurists. And he was very busy lobbying non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and governments about one particular issue very close to his heart. Right, he had a long-standing interest in prisoners and in depredations of armed conflict, right, that people he knew had suffered during the various Irish rebellions against the British. So Sean McBride, right, Chief of Staff of the Irish Republican Army, this terror operation, right, he felt badly about how the Irish had suffered when they went to war with the British. And so he pursued his agenda. He wanted to advocate for the expansion of human rights for people who are trying to kill a military pursuing its job. So he got going in the 1960s, right? So a guy who was a leading terrorist, right, he now becomes the co-founder of Amnesty International and this major leader of the International Commission of Jurists. So people from the Second World and Third World generally had very different considerations compared to those of the First World. You had the International Committee of the Red Cross became heavily involved. So after World War II, the International Committee of the Red Cross tried to increase its power and prestige. Like most activist groups, most activists are always eager to increase their power and prestige, just like the rest of us.
Specifically, Yahya Sinwar, its military leader, to agree to these terms. And that's where it doesn't matter whether there's a war cabinet or Netanyahu favors this or that. Ultimately, if Yahya Sinwar of Hamas is opposed to an element of the deal, it's not going anywhere, regardless of anyone else's support.
And then kind of putting Hamas on the back burner for right now, Hezbollah becoming a bigger and bigger figure when it comes to this war. We've actually heard from Israeli officials warning that the country is on the brink of a full-out war with Hezbollah. In terms of what that timeline looks like, what do they mean when they say a brink, and how would that look going forward? How much more stress would that cause to the IDF?
Yeah, the IDF is stretched pretty thin as it is, with a lot of its units mobilized in Gaza, and then also a good number on the West Bank to quell any violence and uprising there. The issue really has, these two have been exchanging rocket fire. Hezbollah joined the Hamas attack, so to speak. Since October 7th, it has been launching missiles and rockets and cross-border incursions from the north into Israel. So none of that is new. What's happened in the last 3 or 4 days is it really stepped up its barrage of rockets, sending also exploding kamikaze-style drones into Israel and into parts of Israel that are further south of the border than it had previously attacked. And this is
back onto the show. Doovid, we're looking more and more likely that we're going to have some major escalation in the Middle East. Looks more and more inevitable that Israel is going to enter an all-out war with Hezbollah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the case. There's the tough rhetoric that Israel needs to give. You were talking about international law, humanitarian, but then there's also the opposing narrative that for its region, for certain of its international partners, Israel needs to convey strength, and it doesn't necessarily matter to be moral. So, like, there's the message that they're trying to portray in the West and at the international court, and that's almost completely opposite the message that they're trying to portray to their Arab neighbors, or even globally, which is basically just a message of strength in saying you want a team with a winner. The question militarily then becomes more logistically on the ground. And I was talking on my week in review the other night and saying I think Hamas and Hezbollah prepared not only for Israel to go all out against them, but they prepared even if the U.S. Were to join. And you think of like the tunnel networks, the bombs, and they have a survival strategy. And like Hezbollah is largely a creation of Palestinian refugees, from like Arafat or different eras, and it's much different and more difficult. Like if you imagine, there's the element of going to war against Lebanon. So if you compare the Israel versus Gaza, it would be more like going to war against Lebanon. But if you looked at it, Israel versus Hamas, Israel versus Hezbollah would be basically just going against the tunnel network without actually the civilian areas. And, so there's the question, logistically, what could Israel, even if it was America, you're just thinking Israel with all the might of its army, even if it was America with all the might of the American army, could they actually defeat Hezbollah? And, what does it mean to defeat Hezbollah? And the unfortunate reality, just like Gaza, is eventually you have to put boots on the ground. And in order to win with boots on the ground, you're going to take extreme losses. And you could try to bomb and bomb and bomb and kill as many people as possible. But some of those people are going to live. And if they have the will to fight, to hold on to the territory, eventually you're going to have to put boots on the ground. And then you're going to sustain extremely large casualties, even with asymmetric warfare. And that's why Israel's had such problems in Gaza. I heard John Spencer. Do you follow John Spencer sometimes?
No, I don't think so.
He's very popular. He's on like CNN. He's like the West Point professor who kind of pioneered the field of urban combat. But he's extremely pro-Israel and borderline like Hezbollah talking points. He was just on Jordan Peterson's and maybe the Hoover Institute, or he's been making the rounds.
Okay.
But say like urban warfare wasn't really a known field, because like generally you don't want to be stuck in urban warfare because it's a lose-lose battle. And so if you're taking this eventual position, can Israel win without putting boots on the ground? And one thing, depend what you mean by victory. They could destroy a lot of the opponent, but you can't actually conquer and hold and occupy the land without putting boots on the ground. And once you put boots on the ground, you're susceptible to large amounts of casualty, even from your primitive armies. And so Hamas, Hezbollah, I think they prepared for, not only what Israel's doing right now, I think they prepared for even more what Israel's doing. They probably even prepared for the scenario that the American army would fully support and go to war on behalf of Israel. So I mean, that's probably how much they prepared for it in terms of like the tunnel networks and Hezbollah and like the rockets. And then you get into some form of mutually assured destruction. And for the Gaza point of view, because they don't have that much weaponry, the mutually assured destruction is just, you're not going to be able to take this land. They could kill a whole bunch of people. The ploy of international human rights or the international court, but even just militarily, that even if there was no international human rights or international community coming to the aid of Gaza, and Israel and the American army were completely teamed up, still it might take decades to hold out, that they would be able to hold out just militarily, because if you want to occupy the land and eventually send civilians to live in there, you got to get rid of every single last one of them. And with their tunnel network and training for urban warfare, they might be able to hold out 10 years. And then Hezbollah is a completely different beast. One thing, because they're in mountains in a much larger range, and they have significantly better weapons. So most of the experts, kind of like if it became Armageddon and they hit all their buttons, seen today where Hezbollah released the drone footage over Haifa, is that Hezbollah could probably kill upwards of 100,000 Israelis. And so then you have to it's basically becoming a bluff of mutually assured destruction. Where like Israel, well, if they have a nuclear bomb, could they even drop it? Or and not only like, okay, the bombs, like if Israel just starts bombing and bombing and bombing, and and then Hezbollah sends all their weapons, is it worth Israel taking 100,000 casualties to, so to say, defeat Hamas and Hezbollah once and for all? And then as I just mentioned, so just bombing them into oblivion doesn't actually work. So let alone if Hezbollah spent all its bombs and however much damage that would cause in Israel, they would still actually have to do a ground invasion, and the ground invasion would probably take a decade. And so some of the more sober-minded people in Israel, like Benny Gantz said, this is going to be a generational war. The complete elimination of Hamas in Gaza will take at least 10 years. And then you get back to like the multiple truth hypothesis, where you have to send multiple different messages to multiple different parties. And so, Israel is probably failing at that game. And then, there's what message are you going to send to the Israelis? You're going to send to the Israelis that we can do this, we could win, we could defeat, we could have, the Zionist dream forever and permanently defeat Hamas and Hezbollah, but it's going to take 10 years and it might cost hundreds of thousands of Israeli lives, but it's worth it. So instead of being, straightforward, which some Israelis have been, you lie to your own public and you mislead them of expectations, like Hamas was supposed to be defeated already by, January. And then to America, just the lying of expectations, which, tends to backfire. So I think Israel is in extreme danger. And that's why like Netanyahu, who's a politician, and he's basically saying everything to everybody. And, now it's coming home to roost. And if Netanyahu goes, it can move in two directions, one like diplomat, and, Israel's only way out is through diplomacy and is going to make concessions, or an even more militaristic person who's going to be like, no, the only way out of this is through pure military victory.
Yeah, I want to keep discussing Israel with you, but while I think of it, do you have any trepidation about Juneteenth? Would you have any trepidation about going outside or going to Juneteenth events? Do you associate a decrease in safety with Juneteenth, or what's your attitude towards Juneteenth? And I do want to get back to Israel, but while this is on the top of my mind, Juneteenth is tomorrow. It's a national holiday. It's also a state holiday in many states. Any thoughts, Doovid?
I don't really go to events like that anyways. So like even my neighborhood, maybe people at barbecues or something. I don't think anyone would invite me. So if I was going to go to like an outdoor gathering with mostly African Americans, um, a lot of people are going to be armed because saying like African Americans, you maybe rightfully so. You look at like the practical after African American perspective, and just saying these people don't like us, they don't want us here. The only thing that keeps them safe is their guns. So say like even in my area, upper middle class African American area, a lot of people relatively educated. If someone made a barbecue, there would be a lot of guns there. A lot of people would have concealed weapons, and it's remotely possible. Even there was a shooting near my house a few weeks ago. It happens regular time. I'm not sure about Juneteenth, but so I would be unlikely to go to any event like that. Period of any sort. I mean, even like a Jewish event, there might. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised even in Hollywood, like if you went to a 4th of July event. I'm not sure the gun laws there, but like a few people would probably be strapped. But I mean, it's unlikely there's going to be a drive-by. There's a chess club that like I'm friendly with that's making a Juneteenth celebration. It's indoors. No one's likely to be strapped. It's in a area, and I would probably be given respect because it's a event centered around chess. But I don't even think I'm likely to go to that. So like I don't celebrate any of this stuff. Like if it's like Christmas, 4th of July, Memorial Day. I mean, I don't really care. Like Juneteenth, like I could understand it from the blacks' perspective or Americans' perspective why they're doing it. As a businessman, it'll delay my shipping. So the post office are closed tomorrow, and I have a few orders of books that I would have shipped out tomorrow morning that will have to ship out Thursday morning.
Would you have more trepidation, say, collecting rent from black tenants on a Juneteenth?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think that would be applicable. Like, if I because I've worked in property management where a lot of the tenants were, but I mean, saying like, I mean, one thing it wouldn't be practical is like you don't really collect rent. People have a due date, and then there's a collection process. So like you don't go door to door and collect rent. Like people are supposed to pay rent by a certain time, and if they don't, they have a collection process, and the collection process is usually done impersonally through letter. And even if they do come into default, um, it's very unlikely that it'd be the person who knock on the door, and then if it did come to a scenario where you had to evict them, um, there's paperwork you form out in your head, the sheriff, and probably like Juneteenth might be a holiday. So, the sheriff probably wouldn't even come out on Juneteenth. So it wouldn't even be applicable what you're asking.
So a lot of Jews are in payday lending and equivalent setups and pawn shops where people can, PAWN, where people can pawn their goods. This is a challenging, demanding, and often unpopular style of business. Do you have any reflections? You probably know a lot of people in these businesses or have some exposure to these businesses.
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, like the violence collection would be outsourced, and often it's just paperwork. It'd be like a credit. So even like a pawn shop, like I mean, if you're talking like Jewish mafia, where you actually have like illegal money lending like under the table, but most of those places have protections to avoid it. They might have bulletproof glass, they might have hired security, and I mean, you don't want to end up in a scenario where you have people owing you money that are not likely to pay you. And if you are a landlord, and like I have worked for in low income housing, you just have a formalized process for dealing with evictions, and it's very impersonal. Like you don't actually know. I worked at a 200 unit place. You don't know most of the tenants. We actually had like a non-Jewish woman who ran the office and did the paperwork and forms, and most of it's done through paperwork. And if it reaches eviction, then there's a process, and you're not even usually there. Like you just pay an eviction service.
Yeah,
and
but there are plenty of Jewish businesses in payday lending, pawn shops, Jewish and Korean businesses that operate liquor stores or convenience stores in black areas. And I'm thinking about a friend of mine. His father was working in a liquor store and was shot and killed in an urban area. So there's a lot of interchange between Jews in particular, but also Koreans with various risky and
Did they
dangerous
sell stuff on
businesses.
credit? I'm saying, okay, it's dangerous, and you take the precaution, you know the risk that you're involved in. So if you're talking like debt collection, I mean, I don't think those people would have been involved in debt collection if they decided to sell stuff on credit. That's a risky business move that could, have some benefit. If you're a Jew who operates a store in a majority African American or Hispanic place, you could consider selling stuff on credit. I mean, a lot of places in Jewish neighborhoods don't even sell stuff on credit. Let alone to do a risky decision to sell things in a Hispanic or Black area. And I mean, there are tough Jews. So, if you're in the
Yes.
business, you could outsource the violence, the collection to, Jews who specialize in it. There were Jews who specialized it. And I had been put in risky situations like that in construction, specifically kind of by like geeky Jews who didn't want to get beat up. And, they kind of they even let me pretend like I was in charge and I was the owner because, it was a situation of violence where you're more likely to be a target of violence if they think you're the owner. So, they actually sent me on behalf, and this was just construction. So, mentioned that, yeah, a lot of Orthodox Jews are in these very dangerous businesses, but because the nature of the Orthodox Jewish community, um, you could exchange best practices, and it's probably pretty rare. Like in your area, like there's probably a whole bunch of Orthodox Jews that have businesses, and they might even know the dangerous Blacks and Hispanics to look out for. And then you also have your tough Jews and your level of precautions. But you got to make a living, you got to make a parnassa, and security is expensive. So you have a store, you can't necessarily afford full-time security or bulletproof glass or these various things. And saying Jews also, like God forbid your friend's father, uh Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, because of the large families, tolerates a larger loss rate than your average American. Thinking like, okay, God forbid if you're a Hasidic Jew and your average family has 8 people, or even like LA where your average Orthodox family maybe has 6 people or something like that. I mean, God forbid, no one wants to lose a family member, but it's the lifestyle and the system that is why Jews are successful in those businesses, because they could afford to take larger losses than like Anglos. Like no Anglo is going to be able to compete in those business because they're just not going to be able to assume the kind of risk that an Orthodox Jew would.
Yeah, so in a lot of urban settings in the United States, including in Los Angeles and New York, Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods butt up against Black neighborhoods. And sometimes when you have the forces of gentrification taking over Black neighborhoods, they're frequently led by former members of the IDF, right? People Israelis who served in the armed forces, left Israel, come to the United States. They usually don't have a big secular education in the English language anyway, so they're very tough, and they start the gentrification process. I notice other Israelis then follow, and then other groups. But that background of coming from Israel, served in the armed forces, engaged in very streetwise occupations such as liquor stores or payday lending or the schmata business, the clothing business, or secondhand businesses, that it creates some very tough Jews willing to go into tough neighborhoods to earn a dollar.
Well, I mean, just to mention on that point, like IDF veterans are expensive. So saying like, probably a lot of times it's people like me or you, when we're on a down point in our life. So I had served those functions for Orthodox Jews that were scared of their own profession and paid me to assume that risk for them. And, like I just needed money. And, so relatively it was an opportunity to make, get paid more than I would in other stands. Usually it was cash. And my rate was much cheaper than an IDF. So like your friend's father or something like
Wait,
that.
your rate's cheaper than the IDF? What do you mean? Former members of the IDF coming to America?
Well, when I was in, like Brooklyn,
Mhm.
I had low points in my life, just like you, I assume, had low
Yeah.
points in your life. And if a person is looking like, some at the low points in our life where me or you might have done something like that, we would have been cheaper than someone who had served in the IDF. that would get a premium. If it's like I've worked for $8 an hour. I mean, it was a long time ago, but like some of the IDF, they would have got a premium. They would have got $12 an hour. And if it's someone like your friend's store, and that money's money, and but there is a premium for IDF, so you can't and a lot of times it's actually OTD people, Balt Shuva, and converts that end up in those positions. And yeah, you do have IDF, and then you say, well, there's low quality IDF and high quality IDF, and you get what you pay for. So you can't just assume that like every Jewish businessman, Orthodox Jewish businessman, gonna have some like IDF commando, so like like elite IDF commando is going to charge 40, 50, $100 an hour, as opposed to some like, haredi, low tier, guy who somehow made it through the IDF that still might charge $15 an hour versus like, Doovid, who, were my worst, phase, lowest points in life, who might have done it for $8 an hour. And I don't know, about your lowest points of life where you might have, taken a very risky job from an Orthodox Jew just because you were desperate.
Yeah, I certainly had my low points. I remember my therapist was she said to me, "You will sell out for so little," right? She recognized my ethical flexibility to take absolute crap jobs, and that I would just sell out for so little. I thought it was a very, very sharp remark. Now,
because
overall,
mostly it's not long-term employment. So it's, I mean, the
right.
times I did
Yeah.
it, usually it was just someone in shul who like, I didn't want to work. Like I just needed enough money to get by a few weeks. And because I was like, blindsided by religious belief, I thought magically things might get better. So the reason I did those type things, because it was just, like I was short on rent or I was broke and I needed just to work a few weeks to make some money. As opposed to, even working at McDonald's or something, they're not going to let you work there for 2 weeks. You got to give a longer commitment. And if you're in shul, you could find like, like a lot of the people who employed me, we've talked about in the past, were charitable people that, like occasionally gave me like $10, $20 just because I was a schlepper in shul and they were charitable. And then, sometimes like, oh, you need work. And, next thing you know, you're working in a dangerous, job like construction or a store or real estate for, but if you just need a few $100s to get you to your next stage in life and you just want to do that and move and then, in and out, that's presumably the reason me and you both ended up in those positions, probably, multiple times over periods of years.
Yeah. And talking about the Jewish community as a whole, I mean, morale's been down since the October 7 attack. And I've noticed it's particularly plunged over the past few months, that Israel doesn't seem to have competent leadership, and Israel's enemies seem to be at a far higher level of competence than we've known in the past. Do you agree with my assessment that morale overall is down, particularly since October 7, but particularly in the last 3 months or so?
Yeah, I mean, like the reality was the October 7th was a huge hit to the Jewish psyche and Jewish competence. So it's like, okay, when I spent time in Brooklyn for a period of time, like I had a little hope. There were very wealthy people, but like I was caught up with Hasidim and they were poor and uneducated. And although, people had big dreams, a lot of them were just like, I can do what it takes to get by. And I did crap jobs because like I had to do what I had to do to get by. And I took in reality. But then after things start going good for a while, especially after I had a period of day trading and I was reasonably wealthy, like I never wanted to go back to those low points in my life. All I did for a brief period of time, did take temporarily crap jobs just because I was flat broke. But I certainly didn't want to. So I mean, if you're looking, like the bubble of Israel and Jews has kind of been popped, at one October 7th and saying IDF in Israel is not as good as we thought they were. We're not as secure as we were. And then, the kind of like, well, we're going to be able to redeem ourselves by, utterly destroying Hamas and Hezbollah and getting rid of them forever so Israel could move into being the first class nation. And now saying like, that's a fantasy. We're more likely to be moving into a one-state solution, living as equals as Arabs than to that happening. And so the cold reality of the harsh world is, setting into Jews where everybody kind of thought like, everyone's talking about the day after we defeat Hamas. And now, we've been humbled to kind of like, how are we going to live with these people? We're not going to defeat them. what, and we have no idea what's going to happen. Humbling ourselves is probably the best perspective, saying work with the reality, like probably me and you both times, like we had to do it. We did it. We took a crap job. We did it for a few weeks, got on our feet. And maybe once we paid off our immediate debt or housing, or whatever situation, we were able to look for something better. And I think, collectively, the Jewish people, I call it the messianic fervor, saying like it's uncalled for. Like people think like, oh, because like we're at war and a lot of people are dying, that means like Messiah is coming and good things are going to happen. It's like that's just nonsense. Even from a religious perspective, we're just being punished for our sin. And so that messianic fervor, I mean, you could look at it like, because like, back and forth, like thinking from, perspective, even like my parents or Reformed Jews, educated Jews, and you're looking at like Hasidim, Orthodox Jews who, have very little education, not much of a work ethic, and saying like, you got nothing good coming. But like relatively, they don't think like that. They think they have the world coming to them. And so, I mean, we've had these arguments countlessly in the past because you're very skeptical of Haredim and say like, you got nothing good coming to you. You have no education and no work ethic. How could you possibly have anything good coming to you? And that they would be better served to be humbled and develop a work ethic and just do, on their level. And, as opposed to, these dreams of fantasies like, no, like, fake it till you make it till you make it to the top. And like, yeah, see, like that bubble is popping. And probably not just like Haredi, poor Orthodox, people without a work ethic, but across the board. Judaism has taken a hit across the board, and you could look at the blame. I mean, collectively, like Richard Spencer, said when the October, the war started, that the brand of Judaism, it's going to be completely sullied. I mean, he said it's going to be like the swastika, the Nazi flag, the Israeli flag. But 8 months into the war, trying to defend, like genocide and that, I mean, even just like this irrational exuberance, thinking that like, any day now we're going to defeat Hamas and it's only America's fault. The reason we haven't defeated Hamas is because Biden's holding us back or something like that. Like that narrative's falling. And then also just the brand of Judaism where you used to, you walk around for yarmulke. I was thinking like the Samantha Woll case when it first started, and like the implicit bias where like, of course this Jewish guy didn't kill Samantha Woll, like even the police and the prosecutors. But like now, like 8 months into the war in Israel, you could see like maybe the police and prosecutors, the elites, still have a positive view, but a lot of people are like, no, like like look what Jews are doing in Israel. Like this guy probably did kill his girlfriend. Who are you? Like the brand of Judaism has markedly been decreased. And like me and you who always wear a yarmulke, and we've talked about that in the past, like there's anti-Semitism, there's philo-Semitism, and I'm sure like you in Hollywood, I've read your interviews, and a lot of times like this is just the past, and there's extreme philo-Semitism that we have both benefited from, and there's still a lot of
a stunning day in the trial.
But it's saying like the value of this pass into the philo-Semitism is decreasing.
Right, Jews feel less confident in the United States. I mean, the size and the energy of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestine protesters, the difference in the average age, that the anti-Israel crowd is much younger. And so rationally, Jews will have to expect that support for Israel is going to decrease. So a lot of reason why morale is plunging among Jews. And I wonder how the Haredim are doing. Do they show any more inclination to serve in the IDF, or are they just sticking to their own insular world?
I haven't been in Brooklyn for a while, and Detroit's such a small sample size. But I would imagine, because Haredim, you have the fallback of the community to live cheaply. So like at least the Haredim control large areas of the neighborhood, and with the current welfare state, no Haredi is going to go without a room and board. And so you don't have the, like, okay, because I didn't make, like I worked, I worked really bad jobs many times as a Haredi, but like I also did food stamps for people, and like, so if you are in the protection of the community, you don't have to be humbled. You could just be poor. But I mean, then there's the question of that necessitates the welfare state. So there's problems with charity, especially now. A lot of people giving charity to Israel. There's a lot of yeshivas that aren't getting paid. There's a lot of yeshivas that are having funding problems, tuition problems that are closing down, rebbes that aren't getting paid. But I mean, so if you're haredi, you have a little bit more possibility to just accept being poor. I mean, something like that's how you survived in doing what you did for so long, was just your willingness to basically be dirt broke, where you lived on whatever tiny amount of money that was able to sustain you. So at this point, like, no, I don't see the Haredim getting humbled. I just see them living more and more cheaply, and they might be more and more disgruntled. I mean, some are joining the IDF, some are getting jobs, some are going off the derrick, but that's a minority. And so the majority, the silent majority, is just accepting, and they're also kind of like the delusional belief system, that, or you could solve the humble, the respectable belief system, where it's like, okay, God's will, and like, I would like things to be better, but if this is the case, God wills it. And so just accept harsher conditions of poverty. If the welfare state ended, I don't even know if the harsh I mean, because Jewish history, I don't think the welfare state ending and people like Gaza facing like Gaza level starvation. I don't know. Like, I don't know if people would be like, like that kind of like suffering forces people to humble and change their ways. It might be more likely that, God forbid, people would just die off. Maybe a certain element would change their ways to a more adaptable, survivable strategy. But unfortunately, I think, no, actually the silent majority would actually just die off.
So
I was.
I'll have to think about it. I was just preparing a different thought. So I was sharing my perspective on narratives with a friend of mine who has a PhD, and she was responding to my theory that the professions are primarily out for themselves, that they're trying to increase the amount of money and jobs and power and prestige that they have, and their invites onto TV and publish in prestigious journals. For example, people in the mental health profession, it is in their professional interest to expand the definition of mental health so that more people need their services, and therefore they can make more money. And so too with all the talk of genocide in Israel's war against Hamas, we get so much talk about genocide because we have now more genocide scholars than ever before. We have more human rights scholars than ever before. And this hyping up Israel's war with Hamas as a genocide is a way to get attention and to increase demand for their services as experts in genocide and experts in human rights. And so my friend said, wow, that seems simple, but it really seems to crack the code on everything. She says, I became an expert in X area, and then suddenly I see what I studied everywhere. And maybe it's about spotting things more easily, but perhaps more often than not, it's about manufacturing what I need to imagine myself to be relevant and important and deserving of income and prestige. So what do you think about these theories that so much of what we hear in the news media comes from people who are trying to manufacture prestige, income, and jobs for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, the media perspective, they got to hook you in and keep you, and it's largely ineffectual. So we said, okay, like, we were talking Sunday about, the Doovid. And maybe you also adapted my narrative from being, like a successful, prominent leader within the Jewish community to being a failed Baal Tshuva. And had I not done that, I'd probably be more likely to be a failure in life. To just become delusional. And because I've done that, it's allowed me to withdraw from the community somewhat and actually improve some of the aspects of my life that I'd been giving less attention to. Like, I've expanded my business, my bookstore, I've improved my relationship with my parents. I became active in my neighborhood, the homeowners association. I've been more involved in chess coaching. I've been going to Jewish Voice for Peace. I was saying, like, God forbid I went to Jewish Voice for Peace, and it was like dominated by women. A lot of these women were actually like younger and attractive, and I felt like I could actually like maybe like find a wife in Jewish Voice for Peace. Like I almost never really felt that way in synagogue because you have to go through like a matchmaker. But it's like Jewish Voice for Peace. I might actually just be able to walk up to a woman and get a date and find the right woman, as opposed to in the Orthodox circles have to go through a matchmaking process. But I'm saying like that, like you in your 12 steps and you're unleashing your earning potential. So that humble yourself, admit your failures. So Doovid did that. I humbled myself. I admitted my failures. I'm not really a prominent member of the Jewish community. A lot of Jews don't even like or respect me. I still love Judaism. I still put on tefillin, but to withdraw and then put more energy into the aspects of my life that were being more successful. And that, like we were talking Sunday, also the difference of individual narrative identity versus group narrative identity. So this became very difficult because my individual narrative identity had previously been mostly defined by my membership within the group of Jews and specifically Hasidic Jews, and now I'm unsure about my identity within the group of Jews, although I've been able to develop new identities, like as a chess coach, as a concerned neighbor, maybe within like Jewish Voice for Peace, or something like that. And I'm not sure if that parallels changes in your life too, where you have been able to reassess the situation, admit your failures, and put that energy more towards things that are successful. Maybe you've mentioned you're earning more money than you ever had in the past, or also like non-Jewish friends. Because I've lost my Jewish identity somewhat, I've solidified more relations and friendships with non-Jews, and various things like my family and my brother, different type things. So I'm not sure if that's paralleling what's happening with you, but
Well, my level of participation in Orthodox Judaism hasn't changed much for about 8 years. About 8 years ago, I switched to putting less effort into attending various Torah classes and davening, and instead put that time into 12-step programs. And so that was a big switch for me, 2015, 2016.
so
But
maybe I'm doing what you did in the last few years, now, and I don't know if that, like, I used to put a lot of effort into being at the center of Jewish affairs, leadership, assisting important rabbis, community leaders, being at important Jewish community events, to be a part of it. That feeds kind of like a delusion that I'm an important Jew in the community, to largely withdrawing from that. And I'm not sure if previous to that 8 years, if that would have been also similar to you, where you made a point to kind of be in the center of things, and you kind of stepped out to just you're going to be your own man and focus at what's being successful than trying to be in the center of Jewish things.
Well, also what happens is when you're in your 20s, at least in West Los Angeles, you're single Jew in your 20s, even single Orthodox Jew in your 20s, there's an enormous crowd to hang out with. But by the time you hit 40, right, your peers are overwhelmingly married, and those who aren't married are highly dysfunctional. So when social life changes as one's ages, and almost all your peers get married or just reveal themselves as highly dysfunctional.
Yeah, I mean, God forbid, like, if we retreated to the Orthodox community, like, as saying, like, they would send us to the front line to man dangerous businesses. That's really all they have for us at this point.
Okay, anything going on with the Samantha Woll trial?
Yeah, I mean, they had the long testimony of the boyfriend today, and that was basically all that happened today. There were a few like minor police things, and it seems vaguely unclear why the prosecution even called them. And so it came out today they had to offer immunity, at least for the testimony. He still could be a suspect. There's no statute of limitations on murder, but whatever he said today, he was granted immunity. But I guess the prosecution wanted to preemptively call him. But I mean, he's kind. I mean, I know the guy, and I have no idea what actually happened. And it's like two things. One thing, he has kind of like a typical, kind of like Jew spaz, guilty, nervous personality, where like I've had that over my life, and a lot of Jews I know, where you talk very low, you mumble, but then you could be pressed and like all of a sudden spaz out. And like I remember a few times, like at the downtown synagogue, like that, I think like over arguments about like whether we have a minion or not, where it's kind of just humble, but then all of a sudden could spaz out. So I think he was a bad witness in that sense, where I had a local Jew on my week in review, and he was saying like, because I know a lot of African Americans, specifically like the rapper Entertainer, he was asking, he always like, why are you so nervous? What are you worried about? And I was just like, well, that's my personality. Like I'm always nervous and worried, and like maybe that's one of the benefit of African Americans, where they suffer much less worry and nervousness. But there's a tendency to connect nervousness and a guilty personality with lying. So I think the witness appeared uh, relatively pretty bad. I saw like even the news even some of the newspapers were questioning whether he's guilty. In the chat on Fox News and social media, it seems almost like half the people following the trial, think that the ex-boyfriend's guilty. I mean, God forbid, the defense attorney, um, because it was kind of nonsensical. So the defense attorney is supposed to be defending his client, and somehow he's becoming like the prosecuting attorney, like he's trying to crack the witness and get him to admit that that he killed her. And so it was somewhat like nonsensical. You see the paper, just bizarre how it came to be, or why the prosecution even called them. But there were some interesting points. I mean, if you're thinking like, God forbid, the defense attorney, trying to get him to say like, at least make it look like he's a plausible killer, not his client. And he's saying like, well, she dumped you, right? And then like, she rejected you. You were hurt that she rejected you. And then he was like, I'm not so sure she rejected me. And then he's like, well, she did break it off with you multiple times. Like, yeah, I wouldn't use the word rejected. And then, even asked like, did you know that she was having sexual relations with this other man the same time? God forbid. And, so he's just kind of like has his head down and mumbling, but, to the audience, thinking like maybe this guy did kill her. Like she dumped him and he didn't even know, like she's having sexual relations with multiple people at the same time. I mean, in terms of like the evidence, it's a huge unknown, whether this random black criminal killed her or not is very circumstantial evidence. This guy, like they played his panic attack. It was heartbreaking to listen to. I knew the guy felt sympathetic, but at the same time, like I'm like, maybe he did kill her, but he has this horrible panic attack. He calls the police and they come to him like, what's wrong, sir? And he's like, I killed my girlfriend. And they're looking like, what are you talking about? Because like he's in Kalamazoo, like 150 miles, and they're just looking at like this sympathetic kind of like geeky business guy who's having a meltdown, but he's like, I killed my girlfriend, like, and then panting and raving, and then the next day he denies it. He says that it was caused by some sort of new depression medicine and a panic attack, and it was just a delusion. He didn't kill her at all. He's completely innocent. And but the defense attorney made these like good points, because like he's in prison, and he calls his parents. He's like, I've been arrested, and like he has the tapes there. So he had done this with multiple other witnesses that changed their story, where he's like, did you say this or not? And then after they said it, he played the tape. So like, this guy knew he had been coached, and he admitted he'd been coached also. So the defense attorney's like, you've been coached for this, right? And then like eventually he got him to admit that like, yes, he had been coached. And even like the prosecution, for whatever reason, seemed to have coached the witness. But like, this point, like he calls his mother in prison, and he's just like, I'm in prison, I need a lawyer. And his mother doesn't ask, what'd you do? So the defense attorney was basically, implied like your mother didn't need to know what you did, because she knew that you were going to be arrested for killing Samantha Woll, God forbid. And so, just looking at the scenario, it's like, if I called my mom, is like, okay, like, God forbid, mom, I'm in prison. She probably like, first thing she asked, like, what'd you do? But in this case, his mom didn't ask what she did. So the defense attorney implied like, because your mom knew exactly what you were arrested for. And then, then refusing. But I mean, he looked really guilty. And I got to assume like, with just the tiny bit of blood evidence, that
Okay, let me jump in. Who's the black guy with the dreads? Is he defense attorney, prosecutor?
He's the defense attorney. But in this case, because the prosecution called the ex-boyfriend Jeff Hertzman, who I happen to know, to the stand, he was acting as the prosecution, trying to get make it look to the jury as if this guy is the likely murderer.
Yeah, so I've dated a lot of promiscuous Jewish women and promiscuous non-Jewish women, and initially it's great because the sex is easy and the sex is plentiful and the sex is usually enthusiastic, but it always comes with an inordinate amount of mental illness, right? That sexual promiscuity is just not good for women, doesn't bring out the best, and while it's fun and it's relatively easy and it's plentiful and it's zesty, it does sap your spirit, particularly when your girlfriend starts cucking you with other guys or with other women. I had one girlfriend who would go off on these lesbian flings, and she used to date someone who was a big power player in Hollywood. And I asked her, how did he tolerate your lesbian flings? And she said, oh, he wouldn't put up with that for a minute. So obviously, because I was so passive, or because she just didn't particularly value our relationship, she was willing to go out on flings with lesbians in a way that she wouldn't when she was with a power player.
Did any of them have kind of like a geeky boyfriend that was completely unaware of what she was doing with you?
Oh no, I wasn't the one who was cheating. Like I had relationships with promiscuous Jewish women. I didn't have just like
Is
one
it
off.
possible that at the same time that they were also seeing a more conservative, geeky Jewish guy that would have been completely unaware that she was having sexual relations with you?
I don't believe so, because I saw these women usually in the context of a relationship, but it is possible. I'm curious.
I mean, in this case, because it's a murder investigation, it's like I even know, I know both of them, and I know the other guy who, and I even know like one other guy she might have been, that was implied that she might have been having sex with, and the defense attorney, basically sprung it on him. It's like, did you know that she was having sex with this guy? Like, how did that make you feel? Jealous, right? He was trying to like pressure him to admit, like, yes, I killed her. But I mean, if you were thinking a scenario like that with your past relations, that it could have led to a murder like this, where is it more likely that your sexual escapades and these promiscuous Jewish women could have led to a Jew on Jew murder? Or you think like, no, it's probably a random black thief who just killed her over a few dollars?
Right. I think more the latter. I never had the sense that my promiscuity was going to lead to a Jew on Jew murder, but I did have a sense that it was dangerous, that it was creating kind of a centrifugal force that just kind of flung you out, out where the buses don't run no more. You're kind of leaving polite society, you're leaving the company of good, decent people. And so I did sense a growing danger. And one thing about these kind of trials and true crime in general as a genre is that it peels back the layers of how we present ourselves. But we can also have these experiences in daily life. So I don't know about you, but I have this self-image of myself as a good person. But then I've recently had experiences where I see just how selfish I am. That when I wanted to talk to someone, I just like went right up to them and talked to them, interrupted them. They were talking to someone else, and I just went over and I interrupted them. Or when I needed help, like I would interrupt other people. But when they turned to me for immediate help, I said, "Oh, hang on, I've got these things that I need to do first." And so when the pretense is ripped apart and you recognize that you're a flawed human being and that your self-image of yourself as a good person is not fully in reality, that's a painful, embracing cold shower. That's how I experience it. And so I kind of identify with people whose private lives get turned upside down in these true crime trials and the whole genre, because just in my daily life, sometimes I just see how my own self-image is somewhat fraudulent. Any thoughts, Doovid?
yeah, I mean, if you think like, God for like the Pink Floyd, the Wall, the trial, sentence you to your greatest fear to be exposed before your peers, and something like that, where God forbid, like maybe you think this Jeffrey guy actually killed her and he deserves all this, but maybe he's just an innocent victim, and here he is, in like in front of the whole world. He's coming out. He's a pathetic simp. His girlfriend was getting banged by a bunch of people on the side. He had no clue, and like, and worst on that, like people think he, like, oh, the simp, he probably spazzed and killed her because he's a simp. Um, versus the random black dude. So if you were in any of those angles where it came on, not just like, okay, like you're a live streamer, you're used to taking questions, but if you were, like, police, questions, like, okay, that girl you used to date, she's been murdered, God forbid. And, this other person said, that we're asking all her ex-boyfriends because we suspect it was one of her ex-boyfriends that did it. And then, just the awkward scenario of ex-boyfriends being together around a promiscuous woman, let alone
right. But I want to turn it back, make it more personal. Do you like me have a self-image of yourself as a good person, and then do you encounter reality at times in a painful way that makes you recognize that much of your self-image is fraudulent?
Like, I've learned so much because this, or most of self-work, that I would say, like, no, I'm extremely well aware of my faults. I try to be a good person. I try to do a lot of good deeds, but I'm extremely self-aware of my faults, and I have a more negative self-perception, where I'm more prone to believe that people are out to get me, or think poorly about me. I'm pretty careful about my action too, but I would say I try to be a good person, and like I'm well aware of my flaws. So I don't suffer delusions that much like that.
And were you at ease in Jewish Voice for Peace? Do you agree with that approach?
So I mentioned the comment because they're like changing their bylaws, and they're trying to Jewish Voice for Peace has gotten very big, and from being mostly a bunch of older people, there's actually a lot of younger people involved, including attractive, educated young Jewish girls. However, Jewish Voice for Peace tends to basket together all the leftist causes. So they're trying, they can make a mission statement, and if you're going to be part of Jewish Voice for Peace, you got to like pledge to a mission statement, kind of like the downtown synagogue, where it's like you have to accept the whole basket of leftist causes, including like Pride Week and LGBT plus and anti-racism and various things. And I was like, well, is Jewish Voice for Peace specifically a leftist? Can I be like a libertarian, nonpartisan, anti-Zionist? Like I want to, stop the war, be a peace activist, but I don't want to bundle together all the leftist causes. And it was kind of like a question mark, because basically everyone there is a leftist activist, and like relatively their anti-Zionism or anti-war activity is just one of their many leftist activities, and not even their main one. As for me, like basically the anti-Zionism is the only activity like that I'm joining for. But maybe in this circumstance, and even like the woman leading the meeting was kind of like, you're just thinking like, like, okay, like all these restrictions, and we're trying to stop a genocide. So like, how are we going to stop a genocide? I mean, if you use that language, well, we're policing people on all these other leftist issues, and it's like, well, you're not. And so, but I don't know what they'll do. They might, at the end of the day, because they are basically progressive woke people, and there may not be room for intersection. And my crossover with Jewish Voice for Peace is mostly with Palestinians, because I go to more straight Palestinian events, meeting up, talking to Palestinians, trying to work towards some sort of peace with that. And most of the Jewish Voice for Peace have less exposure directly to Palestinians than me. So I mean, there's incentive, the intersection, to work together, but it may or may not work. So we'll see moving forward. And I assume you've experienced that also, where I would assume most of these promiscuous Jewish women you knew were probably leftist activists.
Yeah, most of them are on the left. Sexual promiscuity does seem to go hand in hand with the left-wing politics, while people who share my politics tend to be highly selective about the type of guys they go to bed with.
Yeah, not even mentioning but I'm saying that, like, I like reform and conservative Jews, like, just personal. A lot of them are educated, like talking about interesting subjects, still like Jewish networking, well-wishers in many ways. However, maybe it's always been, basically all or nothing. And so, once they hear you have fundamental disagreements and leaning right, tends to, put a hamper. And, sometimes the relationship will temporarily, our intersectionality is important, so we'll just let that slide for now. But eventually, once the intersectional necessity, then it'll be like, it's a problem. We don't see eye to eye. It'd be similar with, right-wing Jews or Orthodox Jews. So like, once you stop being Orthodox, like, it's very difficult to maintain these relations. And even if you take a fundamental stance, like anti-Zionist, like if you just took a conscientious stance, like, I can't do this anymore, I'm against the war, I love being Jewish, but like, I don't want any problems with Palestinians, you would probably lose like half your Jewish friends, which is something I went through also, where just these guys like Doovid went crazy, and in previous times they could just like, okay, what's the big deal? He's an anti-Zionist. It doesn't really matter. Israel is strong, but now when Israel is weak, and they got to think they have to close their ranks, I would be much largely excluded. People unfriend me on Facebook, shun me even.
Isn't it weird?
Like, maybe, I don't know if you were neutral, but I assume you could imagine something like that happening in your area.
Yeah. So isn't it weird being anti-Zionist when the majority of Jews live in the Jewish state? I mean, how can you be opposed to a state where the majority of the world's Jews live?
Because I see it's completely unnecessary to my Judaism to have a Jewish state. I say, like, we could live peacefully together with Arabs as equals, and like, I don't see any connection to my Judaism, for that desire. And then especially when that leads you, so that's how I always felt. Like, it was a period of time in Israel, and like, I saw what it was like living in Israel, and maybe you could call it apartheid even when I was there 25 years ago, and just didn't think about it that much. But I always was kind of like, we don't really need this. Like, couldn't we just live as equals with the Arabs? And most Jews, even secular Jews, liberal Jews, fundamentally disagree with that. And but I still do all the religious stuff. I still love being Jewish. I could go to shul, I could chant, kosher, study Torah, and just saying, like, what do I need an ethno state for? But yeah, I mean, you're right. Obviously, the vast majority of Jews, even secular Jews, are fundamentally Zionist and do think that it's important to have a Jewish ethno state.
Well, the majority of Jews do live in Israel. So if you're pro-Jewish, it's hard to understand how you can be anti-Israel and pro-Jewish.
Well, I mean, so previously I just wasn't an activist. That was just my personal opinion. Like, so when we first started streaming, if people asked me, I would tell them, like, yeah, I'm anti-Zionist. Like, I don't think we need an ethno state. I think we should give full citizenship to the Palestinians. But I wasn't activist. Like, I occasionally went to interface with Muslims or Palestinian events, but it was a few times a year. I had a handful of Palestinian friends. It was inconsequential that was my belief system, even within Judaism. It's only during this crunch time where two things. One, I've become more of an outspoken critic of Israel than previously, and even taken some positions, like more actively working with Palestinians, or vocally speaking out against the war. So like previous times, that was just my opinion if you asked, but I wasn't politically active, and I'm not that really politically active now either. But so just how I feel, as opposed to being like a full-time. I'm not an anti-Israel activist, although I probably I've been vocally. I have a YouTube channel and a little bit of a following, and I've, since the war, I've been saying the same message week after week of which could be considered straight anti-Israel message, and that is extremely isolating to most Jews that are hurt by that or scared by that.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Okay, I've run out of energy, so I'm going to wrap up the stream. Any final words for today?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate talking, like you were saying at the beginning, like, humble ourselves, and we've done that in our lives, and even this situation. So even like our opinions on world affairs don't really matter that much, and so like the 12 steps, like we were saying on narrative identity, going to synagogue, one sympathetic friend could make a world of difference. The difference between showing up and not showing up, if there's no sympathetic friend, you're probably going to stop showing up. If if you have an entourage, you'll probably show up all the time. But just one sympathetic friend to keep you going, and then just like streaming, to have one friend who believes in you, one friend who like you, who constantly was kind of like, not harping on me, but like you should probably stop smoking the weed, or just like a positive influence. So I appreciate that and think that's important. Especially in these bad situations, you need someone in your corner who believes you and has a little bit of courage to call you out in a helpful way. So I appreciate that.
Okay, David, take care, man. Good to talk to you.